The silence felt wrong. I wasn't out here to chase trouble. After years of combat, I had sworn I wanted nothing but peace. Yet as I watched the sun break over the Appalachian ridges, I couldn't shake the sense that the wilderness was holding its breath, waiting for me to stumble into something it had been hiding for decades. My name is Jonas Keene, a veteran who walked away from the noise of war and buried himself deep in these mountains. The scars I carry aren't all visible nightmares, come easier than sleep, and the quiet is both my sanctuary and my prison. The only reason I get out of bed most mornings is because of the two loyal companions at my side, Atlas, a German shepherd with a soldier's discipline, and Luna, a restless husky, whose bright eyes seem to pull me back toward the living. Together, the three of us keep each other whole. That day began like any other. We hiked through the pines, the dogs weaving ahead of me on the trail ears, pricked tails cutting through the mist. The forest was still the kind of stillness that presses against your chest. Then it happened. Atlas froze mid-stride, nose high, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Luna circled back, her usual playful gait replaced by sharp urgency. They weren't following the deer tracks anymore. Something unseen had seized their attention, dragging us toward a shadowed ravine tangled with vines. I pushed through the brush and felt my pulse slam. There, half swallowed by moss and earth, lay the skeletal carcass of a downed military helicopter, a forgotten tomb of steel in the middle of nowhere. My hunt for peace had just turned into a hunt for truth. If you're as unsettled as I was in that moment, hit subscribe, because what came next nearly cost us our lives. When I first saw that wreckage swallowed by the forest like a beast that had been sleeping for decades, it hit me harder than a bullet. I stood there frozen with Atlas and Luna stiff at my side. For a moment, I thought I'd lost my grip on reality. But the truth was undeniable. Something had been waiting for me in that ravine, buried under moss and silence. I knew that whatever I had stumbled upon would not let me go unchanged. Yet before I can tell you how that discovery unraveled my life, I need to take you back to the place I called home and the rhythm of my days. You have to understand who I am, what I carried, and why two dogs were the only reason I hadn't already surrendered to the ghosts that stalked me. Without that, none of this will make sense. My cabin sat on a shoulder of the Appalachian Mountains, tucked between ridges so steep they blocked the morning sun until well past 8. From the outside, it was nothing more than a box of timber and stone roof, patched with tin and shingles scavenged from abandoned barns. Smoke often curled from the chimney even in spring because the nights were cold enough to bite. Inside the space was spare utilitarian, a wood stove and narrow bed shelves lined with jars of beans and dried venison. No TV, no radio. Just the creak of logs as they shifted in the fire, and the restless breathing of two dogs asleep on the floor. That cabin was both my fortress and my cell. After 2 deployments overseas, after watching friends bleed out in dust and chaos, I came back with medals I didn't care to polish and memories I couldn't scrape out of my skull. The VA handed me pills in amber bottles, told me to manage symptoms. But symptoms were all I had left. The shaking hands, the flashbacks, the way fireworks made me dive for cover. I couldn't bear the pitying eyes of neighbors, the strained voice of my sister on the phone, begging me to come back to town. So I didn't. I built a place where no one could hear me when nightmares tore me apart at 3 in the morning. But I wasn't truly alone. Atlas had come into my life first, a German shepherd with a body like carved stone and eyes that watched me the way a soldier watches his sector. He was disciplined by nature, alert, cautious, but never cruel. When I walked the perimeter of my clearing, he paced beside me, head low, ears swiveling like he understood exactly what it meant to secure ground. He was my sentry. Luna came a year later, a husky with a coat of white and silver that caught the light like snow at dawn. She wasn't disciplined at all, at least not in the military sense. She bounded, laughed in her own way, pounced at shadows. But she had a gift Atlas didn't. She reminded me what joy looked like. She dragged me out of myself when I would have sunk too deep. If Atlas was my wall, Luna was my spark. Together they kept me alive. There were mornings I woke, drenched in sweat, fists clenched as if still holding a rifle. I'd stumble out to the porch, gasping for air, trying to ground myself. And there they were, Atlas sitting tall, watching me with steady patience, Luna pressing her cold nose against my shaking hand. No words, no judgment, just presence. That's what saved me more times than I can count. My days followed, a ritual one that gave shape to chaos. I rose with the light brewed bitter coffee in a dented steel pot, then stepped out to greet the world in silence. The mountains didn't care who I was. The trees didn't ask questions. Out here, I could almost believe I had a place. After breakfast, I trained with the dogs. Atlas thrived on commands, sit, stay, guard. He responded like a fellow Marine, sharp and exact. Luna, on the other hand, pretended to resist, but her blue eyes sparkled with mischief. She'd dart one way, make me chase her, then return wagging tongue, lolling as if to say, "Don't forget, life isn't just drills." Their balance mirrored the battle inside me, the soldier who couldn't let go, and the man who desperately wanted to. Hunting was our pilgrimage. It wasn't about the meat, though. The venison filled my jars and kept us fed through long winters. It was about survival, in a way that felt clean. No orders shouted over static, no politics, no endless justifications. Just me, the dogs, the forest, and the challenge of tracking something that belonged here more than I ever would. We packed lightly dried rations, a battered rifle, water filter, compass. Atlas carried some gear in his harness. Luna trotted free nose always, a head tail flagging. We walked for miles under canopies of oak and pine, listening to the wind sing through branches, the crunch of leaves under our boots and paws. Out there, I could almost forget the desert, the stench of cordite, the ringing screams. Out there, the only sound that mattered was the rustle of deer through brush or the splash of a trout leaping in a stream. Nights in the forest were both my trial and my bomb. I'd build a small fire, keeping it low, so the sparks wouldn't betray me to eyes I imagined in the dark. Old habits die hard. Atlas always circled the camp nose to the ground before lying at the edge like a sentinel. Luna curled against me, her warmth seeping into my bones, her heartbeat steady against my ribs. Sometimes I stared too long into the flames, and the crackle would drag me back to a firefight, wood smoke turning to black powder, the forest to a street lined with rubble. My hands would tremble. My breath would catch. And then Atlas would nudge me. Luna would whine, softly pulling me back. They never failed. People think solitude is peace. They're wrong. Solitude is a mirror, and it forces you to look at every crack inside. Some days I hated that cabin because it echoed with voices I couldn't silence. Other days I thanked God for it because it let me fall apart where no one could see. Atlas and Luna never judged me when I punched walls or when tears burned tracks down my face. They were my audience of two, and they accepted every version of me. The townsfolk rarely saw me. Once a month, maybe, I'd ride down the mountain in my rusted truck for supplies, ammo, flour, coffee, the things you can't forage. Folks at the general store gave me a wide berth. Some nodded politely, others looked away as if afraid my shadows might follow them home. I didn't blame them. I didn't want to be seen either. I learned to read the seasons, by the way. Atlas's coat thickened, and Luna's energy spiked when snow threatened. I learned to trust their instincts more than my own. If Atlas froze, I froze. If Luna whined, I listened. They taught me to live in a rhythm older than war, older than fear. Yet even in that rhythm there was an undercurrent I couldn't escape. The silence was too perfect. The nights were too long. I told myself this was what I wanted, to disappear, to bury myself in the bones of mountains. But part of me knew it couldn't last. The world doesn't let men like me fade quietly. Something always comes calling. And it did. That morning when Atlas stiffened on the trail, when Luna stopped wagging and began circling with sharp whines, I felt the hairs rise on my neck. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. Their bodies told me this was different. I should have turned back, should have ignored the pull. But I didn't. Maybe I couldn't. The soldier in me never could walk away from the unknown. That's how we ended up in the ravine, staring at twisted metal swallowed by vines. A war machine out of place in this quiet wilderness, waiting for someone to find it. And against every instinct screaming at me to leave it buried, I knew I wouldn't. Because in that moment, my life of ritual, my fragile peace with Atlas and Luna was about to be shattered. Atlas had never broken focus like that before. One moment he was locked on the deer trail, muscles taut with purpose, and the next his whole frame went rigid, ears pricked, a low growl rolling out of his chest. Luna froze too, but in her own way her body stiffened, and her bright eyes darted left away from the tracks we'd been following. I felt the shift like a tremor under my skin. Hunting was our ritual, a steady rhythm that steadied my mind, and when they abandoned the trail I knew it wasn't without cause. Something was wrong. I whispered their names, trying to ease the tension, but Atlas ignored me, his nose high in the air, nostrils flaring like he'd caught a scent that didn't belong. Luna's tail dropped, no longer wagging, her body low to the ground, ears flicking as if she were listening to voices I couldn't hear. Then she whined, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the quiet forest like a blade. Against every instinct that told me to stay on the safe path, I trusted them. I always had. "Show me," I muttered. An atlas pulled forward, lunging into a wall of tangled rhododendron and thorn vines. I followed, cursing under my breath as branches clawed at my arms and rifle. Luna darted ahead, her white fur flashing in the shadows as she wove through the undergrowth. The descent into the ravine was treacherous, steep ground, slick with moss and roots that threatened to send me sprawling. My breath came heavy as I pushed through, hands gripping branches for balance. The deeper we went, the more the air changed. It grew still, damp, heavy, with the smell of earth long undisturbed. Then I saw a scar in the trees where trunks had been snapped clean decades ago, their broken bones hidden now under new growth. Atlas stopped at the bottom of the ravine and barked, once sharp and commanding. Luna circled, her nose pressed against a curtain of vines that clung to a shape too angular, too unnatural to be rock. My pulse spiked. I stepped closer, pushed back the vines, and froze. It wasn't stone. It was metal. Dark olive green, streaked with rust, jagged edges catching what little light filtered through the canopy. I clawed at the vines, tearing them away, until the shape emerged like some monster rising from its grave. Rotor blades bent and snapped. Tail boom twisted at a grotesque angle. Cockpit glass shattered into jagged teeth. The wreck of an Apache attack helicopter lay half buried in the earth, entombed by decades of silence and neglect. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Memories slammed into me. Rotor wash, kicking up dust in a desert village, the thunder of Hellfire missiles screaming toward their targets, the vibration that rattled your bones when one of these machines tore across the sky. I'd seen them in War Predators, above steel birds that gave us life or death depending on whose side they circled. To see one here rotting in a quiet Appalachian ravine was like finding a shark skeleton in the middle of a desert. It didn't belong. Atlas pressed against my leg, silent now, as if he too understood the gravity of what we'd uncovered. Luna's whine was softer, almost mournful, her paw resting against the cold metal skin. My throat tightened. This wasn't just wreckage. This was a grave. I stepped closer, brushing away more vines from the cockpit. The canopy had been crushed. On impact, glass splintered, frame warped, but inside I could still see the seat, the tangle of twisted instruments, wires hanging like entrails. And then I saw him, the pilot. What was left of him was skeletal, slumped in the harness uniform, rotted but still faintly recognizable. His helmet had cracked, jawbone exposed in a silent scream, hands still gripping the control stick as if he'd tried to fight to the end. My chest ached as I stared. He was one of us once, a brother in arms, forgotten, left to decay in the dark while the world carried on. I bowed my head, whispering a prayer. Not out of habit, but out of respect. Whatever had brought him down here, whatever story was buried with him, he hadn't deserved this silence. But there was more. There always island. My eyes drifted from his remains to the cockpit floor, where something caught the light. A heavy-duty gear case wedged under the co-pilot seat, intact, despite the violence of the crash. I reached in, straining against twisted metal fingers, brushing the cold steel. It was secured with a combination lock, the kind issued for sensitive equipment. My pulse hammered harder. I tried to wrench it free, but it was jammed. Frustration burned in my chest. I backed out of the cockpit, scanned the ground, found a fallen branch, thick and sturdy. Using it as a lever, I pried with all my strength until the metal screeched and the case tumbled onto the mossy floor. I crouched beside it, running my hands over the scratched surface. It was heavier than I expected, sealed tight. The lock dared me to open it. But that wasn't all. Atlas had pressed himself against the side of the cockpit nose, jammed into a panel beneath the rudder pedals. He pawed at it, whining insistent. I frowned, leaning in. At first it looked like any other part of the wreck, but when I pressed, the panel gave slightly. My heart jumped. Hidden. I grabbed my knife, wedged the blade in pride until it popped open with a metallic snap. Inside, wrapped in foam and a waterproof bag, was something that made my blood run cold, a ruggedized military hard drive. Not standard flight equipment. Not something you left behind. This had been hidden deliberately. I pulled it out, heavy in my hand, feeling the weight of secrets I wasn't meant to hold. The case at my side suddenly felt secondary. Whatever was on this drive was important enough to bury beneath the pilot's feet, away from sight, away from scavengers. I looked back at the skeleton, at the tattered uniform and shattered helmet. He had tried to protect it, to take it with him into the dark. He had failed to survive, but he had hidden it well, and now it was mine. The forest pressed in around me, the air heavy with a silence that felt alive. This was no longer about a hunt, no longer about survival in the wilderness. This was a door creaking open into something bigger than me, bigger than these mountains. I stuffed the drive into my pack, secured the locked case beside it, then stepped back from the wreck. My knees were trembling. Atlas and Luna hovered, closed their eyes, never leaving me, as if they sensed the weight of what I now carried. I whispered a thank you to the fallen pilot, a vow that his secret would not rot here with him. As I climbed out of the ravine, the world felt different. The trees seemed darker, the silence deeper, as though the forest itself knew I had disturbed something meant to stay buried. Every crunch of leaves underfoot sounded like an alarm. Every bird call felt like a warning. Back at the top of the slope, I turned for one last look. The Apache lay in its grave, twisted steel wrapped in vines, nature reclaiming war's machine. To anyone else it was just wreckage, but I knew better. I had carried death across deserts, felt the burn of betrayal, smelled the lies of war dressed up as honor. What I had found wasn't just metal and bones, it was truth. And truth, I've learned, is the most dangerous weapon of all. By the time I dragged myself and the dogs back up to the ridge, my legs were trembling with exhaustion. The hard drive pressed against my spine inside the pack, its weight far heavier than its size should allow. Atlas trotted close to my side, his eyes sharp and restless. Luna padded ahead, weaving through the trees, with nervous energy glancing back at me every few seconds. They knew something had changed. Hell, I knew it too. I wasn't just walking out of the woods with an artifact. I was carrying someone's last act of defiance. The cabin came into view as the light faded, smoke from the chimney catching the orange glow of dusk. Usually the sight of it calmed me. That evening it only made my chest tighter. I set the pack on the heavy oak table inside, poured water from the kettle into a chipped mug, and stared at the bag like it might bite me. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. The laptop I kept was an old, rugged machine, military grade, built to survive drops and dust storms. I set it up on the table, connected it to the small satellite dish I used when I needed a glimpse of the world beyond the mountains. Then I pulled the hard drive free from its waterproof bag. It was solid in my hands, marked with serial numbers and scuffs, nothing unusual to the untrained eye. But I'd been in long enough to know when something had been built to hide more than it revealed. The dogs settled close, Atlas by the door alert. As always, Luna curling against my leg under the table. I plugged the drive in. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. An icon appeared, and a wall of encrypted code unfolded across the display. It was military-grade security, a fortress of firewalls and authentication gates. A simple password wasn't enough. You needed tokens, biometric scans, keys. But buried in the interface was a smaller prompt, a weak link, maybe asking for a code. I thought of the pilot of the hidden compartment of the drive tucked beneath his seat. He hadn't hidden this for nothing. He had left it to be opened. I tried the obvious serial numbers, dates etched into the casing. Nothing. My frustration built. Then I remembered the odd metal tag I'd pocketed earlier, half buried in the debris. I pulled it from my jacket and typed in the sequence I'd memorized. For a long second, the cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat. Then the screen shifted, and suddenly I was inside. Folders bloomed across the display, manifests, communications, intel. My stomach turned as I clicked through them. The manifests weren't for spare parts or surplus. They detailed shipments of cutting-edge weapons, surface-to-air missiles, encrypted radios, sniper rifles, not going to military bases but to ghost addresses, places that didn't exist. Some listed destinations overseas, others disguised as domestic transfers. The codes looked legitimate at first glance, but I recognized falsification when I saw it. Someone had built an empire of shadows, feeding enemies, while the public believed in patriotism and loyalty. I opened the communication logs next. The files were encrypted but not impenetrable. Buried in them were audio clips. A woman's voice, sharp, confident. The voice of someone used to command, spoke in clipped, coded language. On the other end, a man with a thick Eastern European accent responded with questions about delivery, about price, about timing. My blood went cold. These weren't hypotheticals. These were deals. Atlas shifted by the door, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Luna whimpered, ears pressed back. They sensed the tension pouring off me the way my jaw clenched, the sweat on my palms. I clicked into the final folder, intel, and found a single video file locked with a secondary password. On a hunch, I typed in the pilot's last name. The screen blinked once, then the file opened. A grainy video filled the display. A large glass-walled office, Behind the desk sat the same woman whose voice I'd heard. Mid-40s hair pulled tight, eyes like polished steel. A nameplate on the desk read Isabella Reed, CEO, Aegis Tactical Solutions. I knew the name. Everyone in uniform did. Aegis was one of the biggest private military contractors in the world. They built weapons, supplied mercenaries, made billions off war. And here she was, smiling as she signed off on shipments of advanced American hardware to men whose hands were already soaked in American blood. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the laptop. The betrayal was too much. I thought of friends who hadn't made it back, of coffins draped in flags, of families torn apart. All of it had been fed by profit. I slammed the laptop shut and sat in the dark, shaking, unable to breathe. The dogs pressed closer, Atlas nuzzling my shoulder, Luna whining her paw on my thigh. They were anchors in the storm. Without them, I might have drowned in the rage rising in me. That was when the first alert pinged. I didn't see it happen, but I felt it, the faintest flicker in the satellite feed, a spike in outbound data. By opening that file, by piercing the encryption, I'd triggered something. A beacon, a flare. Somewhere out there, someone knew exactly where I was. My heart slammed in my chest. I pulled the cable, cut the connection, yanked the drive free. Too late. The next day passed in a blur of paranoia. I barely ate. Every time the dogs barked at the wind, I gripped my rifle. Every bird overhead felt like it was watching me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe I'd been too long in the dark. But that illusion shattered when Atlas stiffened in the yard, head tilted toward the sky. At first, I saw nothing but blue. Then I caught it, a flicker of movement, high above the tree line. A small, dark shape gliding with impossible smoothness. A drone. Military grade. Cold dread sank into me. This wasn't random. They had me. That night, as darkness fell over the mountains, the forest grew too quiet. Even the crickets hushed. I braced the door with the oak table, slid my Colt 1911 onto the floor beside me, rifle propped against the wall. Atlas paced, teeth bared, Luna's hackles raised. We all felt it. The first thud rattled the door just past midnight. Atlas exploded into a frenzy of barking, his body slamming against the wood. A second impact followed, harder splinters flying inward. At the same time, glass shattered at the side window, rifle butts smashing through the shutters. The night erupted with gunfire, rounds tearing through wood splinters, raining down like hail. I rolled away from the door, dragging the pack toward me, heart pounding like artillery in my ears. I returned fire through the broken window, 2 sharp shots. A cry from outside told me I'd hit something, but it wasn't enough. There were more of them. Professionals. The dogs were chaos incarnate. Atlas threw himself against the door, snarling, buying me seconds. Luna darted toward the window, snapping at the shadows outside, forcing the attackers to hesitate. But I knew the truth. We were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped. I had to move. Atlas, Luna. I hissed, pointing toward the back room. They obeyed instantly, though their eyes blazed with fury. I grabbed the pack, stuffed the hard drive inside, and smashed the rear window with my boot. The glass tore at my jeans as I shoved the dogs through first, then followed, landing in the dirt behind the cabin. We ran. The forest swallowed us whole, darkness wrapping tight around us. Behind us, the cabin groaned with impact after impact, wood shattering under the relentless assault. Then a deafening blast split the night, the door finally giving way. Shouts rang out, boots thundering across my floor. My sanctuary was gone. I didn't look back. Atlas ran at my side, his body a shadow of muscle and rage. Luna bounded ahead, turning every few seconds to check we were still there. My lungs burned, legs screaming, but I pushed on deeper into the wilderness. Every snap of a twig, every flicker of moonlight felt like pursuit. Hours blurred. We crossed streams, scrambled up rocky inclines, hid in thickets so dense I could barely breathe. The drone returned, humming above the canopy, its red light sweeping the ground like the eye of some unblinking predator. Each time we froze, pressed into the earth, praying the shadows would shield us. I knew then what we had become. Prey. I'd spent years trying to outrun war, to bury myself in silence. But the truth I'd unearthed had dragged me back into it, made me the hunted. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, to keep the dogs close, to stay alive. Because the men chasing me weren't going to stop. Not until the hard drive was theirs, or I was dead. That was the night everything I thought I'd built, my peace, my solitude, my fragile balance, was reduced to ash. The cabin burned behind me, and ahead stretched only the endless forest, the hunt, and the knowledge that my life had just become a battlefield again. We ran until my lungs felt like they were filled with fire. Behind us, the forest glowed faintly with the flames devouring my cabin, the life I had built, reduced to cinders in one night. I didn't look back again. There was no reason to. Everything that mattered was ahead of me now. 2 dogs, a hard drive full of betrayal, and the unshakable knowledge that we were prey in someone else's hunt. The days that followed blurred into a haze of exhaustion and survival. We slept in shallow hollows in caves, barely big enough for the 3 of us, always ready to move at the snap of a twig. Food ran low, and I rationed what little we had, giving more to Atlas and Luna than to myself. They needed their strength. I could run on fumes. The pursuit never let up. Sometimes I heard voices echoing faintly through the trees, other times the mechanical hum of drones sweeping overhead. My world shrank to a tunnel of paranoia and instinct. Move, hide, listen, repeat, and always the weight of that hard drive pulling me forward. It was on the 4th day when we stumbled across the waterfall. We had been following a ravine, my boots slipping on moss-slick rocks, when the sound grew louder, distant at first, then swelling into a roar that drowned out everything else. When we broke through the last line of trees, I stopped cold. Before us, a wall of water thundered down a sheer cliff, 100 feet of raw power, plunging into a deep emerald pool. Mist clung to the air, dampening my skin, filling my nose with a clean scent of stone and spray. It was beautiful, untamed, but I knew beauty rarely came without a price. Atlas froze first, his ears, swiveling nose, pressed toward the curtain of falling water. Luna bounded ahead, then stopped abruptly, whining at a patch of moss-covered rock to the right of the cascade. I followed, heart-hammering. There, hidden behind a curtain of dripping ferns, was a fissure in the cliff. A cave. I pushed the greenery aside and peered in. Darkness yawned back at me, cool air flowing out, carrying the scent of ancient earth. Something inside me stirred fear, yes, but also recognition. This wasn't random. This was intentional. We squeezed inside my flashlight, cutting a weak beam through the gloom. The tunnel opened into a chamber, stone walls, slick with moisture. And in the center, resting neatly on a flat rock, was a black pelican case, military-grade, waterproof, untouched. I dropped to my knees, hands trembling as I popped the latches. Inside, packed in protective foam, lay the pilot's legacy. Sealed documents, waterproof bags of manifests and communication transcripts, even a memory card, labeled simply Video Evidence. And at the bottom, a vacuum-sealed envelope. I tore it, open eyes, scanning the blocky handwriting inside. If you are reading this, I am already dead. Reed found out. The crash was no accident. Do not trust command. Do not trust the agency. Her network is everywhere. The only person I could trust is a journalist named Ben Carter. He knows the risks. I left a satellite phone for him in the widow's maw. It is your only way out. I sat back hard on the cold stone. The pilot had known he wouldn't survive. He had left a path, a last desperate move in a game he hadn't lived to finish. Widow's Maw. I had heard the name whispered by locals in town, an abandoned coal mine deep in the mountains. Dangerous, half-collapsed, avoided even by hunters. And now it was the only place left for me. I packed everything into my rucksack, cinched it tight, and whispered a thank you to the dead man who had carried this burden before me. Then I turned to the dogs. Atlas was staring toward the cave mouth, his body rigid, Luna's hackles raised. A low growl rolled out of Atlas's chest, deeper and darker than usual. I killed the light and listened. At first, only the roar of the waterfall. Then, faint but clear, the scrape of boots on stone. They were here. We had no time. I shoved the case's contents into my pack, ditched the bulky shell, and turned toward the back of the chamber. The pilot's map had shown a tunnel leading from here into the Widow's Maw. If it was true, it was our only chance. I whistled softly, and the dogs fell in tight beside me as we plunged into the black throat of the mountain. The air grew colder, the darkness pressing in so heavy it felt alive. Water dripped steadily, echoing through the passage. Every step was careful, my hand brushing the wet wall to guide me. Behind us, beams of light swept into the chamber we just left. Shouts followed. The hunters had entered the cave. We moved faster, winding through a labyrinth of natural passages that eventually gave way to man-made tunnels, coal shafts supported by rotting beams, rusted tracks running into the dark. Widow's Maw. The mine was a nightmare. Tunnels branched in every direction, twisting and collapsing, the air thick with dust and age. My flashlight beam wavered across skeletal machinery, carts overturned timbers, groaning with every breath of air, and behind us always the sound of pursuit. Atlas pressed against my leg, his nose lifting, ears twitching. Luna whined softly, then darted down a side tunnel. I trusted them more than my map. We followed just as the sweep of tactical flashlights cut across the passage we'd abandoned. The cat-and-mouse game stretched for hours. Sometimes we froze in alcoves, holding our breath as boots crunched past. Sometimes Luna's sharp bark lured a mercenary off course, giving me the chance to double back. Twice Atlas bristled and growled low, before leading us into narrow fissures where I never would have looked. They were my compass, my shield, my lifeline. But I knew it couldn't last forever. Eventually the hunters would corner us. We had to make a stand. The chance came in a vast central chamber, where the ceiling soared high above, supported by thick pillars of stone. Rusted machines stood like the skeletons of giants, silent witnesses to decades of labor and abandonment. I crouched in the shadows, heart pounding, as Atlas stiffened beside me, and Luna pressed close. Through the night vision goggles I'd stolen off a downed mercenary earlier, I saw them, two figures across the chamber, planting charges on the supports. They weren't just hunting me. They were going to bury the whole mine, bury the truth with it. Rage steadied my hand. I raised the suppressed rifle, took aim, but before I could fire, one of them spun around. His goggles glowed like demon eyes, and his voice rang out. Contact gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Bullets sparked off stone-shattering rusted machinery, echoing like thunder. I dove behind a massive gear, heart hammering as Luna yelped, and scrambled into cover, Atlas snarling with fury. They were trying to flank me, one pushing left, the other sweeping right. Atlas lunged before I could stop him, teeth bared, slamming into the younger mercenary who had crept too close. The man screamed, rifle clattering to the ground as Atlas dragged him down, jaws locked on his arm. I swung around the gear and fired, dropping the other mercenary in a spray of sparks as the suppressed round found its mark. The chamber fell silent, but for my ragged breaths and the low growl of Atlas holding his prey. I yanked him back, zip-tying the man's wrists, his terrified eyes wide as Atlas's teeth hovered inches from his throat. The dogs had done what I couldn't, they had turned the tide. But it wasn't over. The leader was still out there. A voice crackled through the downed man's radio. Bravo team report. Status. I grabbed the mic, forcing my voice steady. Extraction point compromised. Charges set. Returning. There was a pause, then a cold reply. Understood. Burn the site. No witnesses. I dropped the radio bile, rising in my throat. They were going to collapse the mine anyway. Time was short. We moved deeper, following the map until we reached a small brick-walled room, the maintenance station. And there, exactly where Weber's note had promised, inside a rusted toolbox, lay a satellite phone. I snatched it up, powered it on. The screen flickered, searching, then locked onto a signal. I dialed the number scrawled in Weber's note. Ben Carter, a voice answered after 2 rings. My name's Jonas Keene, I said, words spilling out. I have what Captain Weber died for. The manifests. The comms. The video. I'm sending it now. I transmitted everything, the documents, the recordings, the video evidence of Reed's treason. My hands shook, blood pounding in my ears. For the first time in days I felt a flicker of hope. That hope nearly ended when the roof above groaned, dust raining down. Explosions echoed in the distance, the charges were going off. The mine was collapsing. Atlas, Luna, move. We sprinted through the tunnels, rock and timber crashing down behind us. The air filled with choking dust, the earth itself shuddering. I clutched the phone, lungs burning, as Atlas and Luna darted ahead, guiding me toward the faint glow of daylight breaking through a collapsed shaft. We burst out of the widow's maw just as the chamber behind us caved in with a roar, sealing the darkness forever. I collapsed in the grass, coughing, the dogs pressing close, their fur coated in dust. We were alive. And the truth was free. Later, when Carter's information brought the FBI down on Reed and her empire, when the headlines screamed treason and betrayal, I thought of Weber. Of the lonely skeleton strapped to his seat of the note he had left for a stranger to find. He had gambled his life on someone finishing what he started. And through it all, Atlas and Luna had never faltered. They had dragged me into danger, yes, but they had also dragged me through it. Their loyalty had been my anchor, their instincts my guide, their courage my salvation. Justice comes with a price. Mine was blood, sweat, and the ashes of the only home I had built. But as I sat with my dogs at my side, watching the sun rise over mountains that had nearly buried us, I knew the price had been worth it. Because truth matters. And loyalty, whether from a man or a dog, is the only thing that can carry you through the fire to the other side. When the dust settled and the echoes of the collapsing mine faded into the mountains, I realized something had shifted inside me. For years, I thought I wanted nothing more than silence. I built walls of timber and solitude to keep the world out, convinced that if I hid long enough, the ghosts of war would lose interest. But the truth has a way of finding you no matter how deep you bury yourself. And when it came for me, it came in the form of a dead pilot's secret, 2 loyal dogs, and a fire that burned my past to the ground. I look back now and see the path for what it was, the discovery of the Apache wreck, the hidden drive, the betrayal carved into those files. The nights of running with Atlas and Luna at my side, hunted through forests that had once given me peace. The roar of Widow's Maw collapsing behind us, nearly entombing us with the truth we fought to free. Every step was a reminder that loyalty is not a word, it's a choice. Weber chose to die to protect what mattered. My dogs chose to fight when they could have fled. And in the end, I chose not to run anymore. The truth we carried out of those mountains lit a fire bigger than me. Reed's empire of lies crumbled under the weight of exposure, but the scars she left behind remain. Men like her don't vanish. They resurface, rebuild, and strike again in the shadows. And I know now that running won't stop them. Facing them will. Atlas lies at my feet as I speak, these words, still watchful eyes, sharp even in rest. Luna's head rests on my knee, her steady breathing, reminding me that joy still exists in the cracks of a broken world. Together, the 3 of us carry more than memories. We carry a duty to truth, to loyalty, to justice, no matter how steep the price. But this story isn't just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever been hunted by their past, anyone who has felt the weight of betrayal and wondered if standing up was worth it. I've given you my account, but now I want to hear yours. Tell me, what would you have done if you found that helicopter? If the secret of life and death sat in your hands, would you keep it buried, or would you risk everything to bring it into the light? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk about it. Share your thoughts, your fears, even your doubts. And if you want to see where this journey leads, because make no mistake, this isn't the end, hit subscribe and stay close. The mountains are still whispering, and there are more secrets buried out there than 1 man and 2 dogs could ever uncover alone. The fire has only just started. And the next time what we find may not just test our loyalty, it may demand a sacrifice none of us are ready to make.